Be careful who you give your keys to. Before the story begins, I would like to clarify that I'm writing these lines during the last days of the year 2022. I'm 41 years old now. However, I was 33 and 34 when this was happening. I'm a female and I'm living in the southeast US. Several years ago, I was in the midst of acrimonious divorce from my then husband, full of crazy allegations and typical angry feelings centered around custody of our child. As with many divorces, friends and professional colleagues seem to pick one side or the other. In my case, there was one sort of professional contact who reached out to me after hearing about the divorce, who offered to be a witness for my case because of some experiences he related that I had been previously unaware of regarding my ex behavior out at networking events. After this initial call, he started calling on a semi-regular basis to make sure I was okay. This wasn't someone I knew well prior to the separation, and he was much older than I was, but claimed to have experience with divorce and custody, and I figured that it was a good idea to be polite and not alienate him, since his testimony was important per my lawyer. I kept things friendly, but I always had a weird feeling about him. After a few months, he called one day that my son was very sick, and when I told him that I couldn't talk and explained why, he offered to run to the store for me, which I honestly appreciated. But after that, he was dropping by the house uninvited, and he would stop by with cookies for my son, etc. Again, I kept telling myself to keep things polite. The divorce is coming soon. Don't make this guy mad. He had called me out of the blue, and I was worried at this point that I was walking a very fine line between being polite and being cold. He had called me out of the blue, and I was worried at this point that I was walking a very fine line, being polite but clearly not interested, and that if he got mad, he might decide to go testify for my ex and say who knows what. During this time, he also helped me set up a security camera system that my dad had mailed me, and at one point I needed someone to walk my dog, and he had offered to do it. He used and returned a spare key the same day. One evening, he showed up while I was painting and insisted on sticking around to help, even though I was having my starting over catharsis and I wanted to do it alone. Just after the painting day, he came around, uninvited and unannounced, with magazine photos of decor, and started carrying on in this maniac way about how we could finish decorating the house. I was so weirded out that I made an excuse to leave. I started ignoring his calls, and I took my son and my dog to stay with my parents for several weeks to avoid a drop-in. I came home just for custody exchanges. I came home a few weeks later, thinking that he would have gotten the hint, and it was a quiet day. The following morning, I took my son on an outing, something like a zoo, and we both came back hot and tired. I put my kiddo down for a nap in my bed, and I decided to close my eyes with him. I woke up maybe an hour or so later, and it took me a moment to realize that something was way off. As I'm blinking off the sleep, I realized that there was a rose bush sitting on my bedside table that I most definitely had not put there. There was a post-it note on it, something about planting it on the yard. I started shaking immediately because I recognized the handwriting, and I stood up to go splash some water in my face, and I decided whether to call my parents or the police. I didn't want any trouble because of the divorce. As I stepped into my bathroom, I realized that the mirror was covered in post-it notes, all with super creepy messages that were intended as like love notes or with affection, but which all scared me. It was like, what the fuck is this? I was still waking up, and I was trying to figure out how these notes could possibly have gotten into my house. My front door was definitely locked, but as I went from room to room, there were notes everywhere. I mean, hundreds of post-it notes covering the walls in my cabinets. There was even one inside my coffee maker. I started grabbing all of them and putting them into a pile, when I got to one in the kitchen that made my blood run cold. It said, "You are cute when you think no one is watching you." And I realized that there was a security camera pointed right where that note was left. The one that he had helped me set up months earlier when I didn't think that he was a psychopath. I called my parents in hysterics. I sent them a bunch of photos, and my dad insisted that I should not call the police. Remember, custody battle. But that he would drive over and change the locks and put a chain on the door. We also immediately changed the passwords on the security cameras, which had been installed to document if my ex tried to break into the house. So there was one on the front porch, but 3 inside the house, including one in my bedroom. This man could apparently see and hear everything going on inside my house for months. The security cameras, I realized he had just pay attention to my passwords when I was setting up the system. But the only way I can figure out that he got into my house is that he must have a copy of my house key the day he had it. And because my dog had gotten to know him, he wouldn't have barked to warn me, which also scared me. I was absolutely horrified. This man had been in my house for a long time. There is no way he could have put that many notes up quickly. And he was right next to my face and feet from my son, and he was right next to my face and feet from my son while we were sleeping, and somehow he thought that was okay. I left and I stayed with my parents again for a few days, afraid of what he was going to do when he realized that he was now both physically and digitally locked out of my house. When I came home, my son had gone to his dad's for the night, and I was home alone, on the phone with another friend from out of town. At around 10 p.m., this man showed up at the door, pounding on it, trying the locks, screaming obscenities, and demanding to be let into his house. Gone were all the niceties. This was someone completely furious and derailed. All I could do was hide in my bedroom until he left. What felt like an hour later. This was St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure that he had been drinking. After that, there were several other times someone would start knocking on the door in the middle of the night, always when my son wasn't home. I think he was crazy, but not that crazy, and figured that if I called the police, he would get in more trouble if my son was there. But he knew the schedule, so I know it was him. He tried reaching out using fake social media accounts several times, always getting blocked. Years later, I discovered that he had friended my mom on Facebook and was therefore still able to see all the photos of us that she posted or shared. And there was a huge argument when I saw a conversation they were having about me and how he could get back into my life. By the way, yeah, she had left her computer locked in. I sold that house 2 years later, still finding new notes even if I was packing, and I'm more than relieved that he no longer knows where I live. I don't post photos of my new house online, not the front anyway, and I have changed the privacy settings on my social media accounts. I avoid all the places he used to go, the networking events he attends, and I stay as under the radar as possible. I could never bring myself to play back the security camera videos because I was traumatized enough and I didn't want to see just how much danger we could have been in. Hopefully he never sees these posts, but I know who you are. I hope our paths don't cross again. Also, a few additional points for the story are these. The total number of notes left totaled more than 200. The lesson that women and men need to take away from my story is that you need to trust your gut feeling. This man did nothing overly aggressive for months. He did things like sitting too close to me, invaded that 18 inches of personal space that people need to feel comfortable, but not so close as to be crossing a line, or he didn't stare, or subtle things that made me think he was interested in more than just being a friend. But he never asked me on a date or said anything outright, so I tried to brush it off. Even when he started getting creepier, like showing up unannounced, he always seemed to have a reason that made it hard for me not to answer the door because I did not want to be rude. Also, I never let him to believe that I was interested in him. In fact, as things started progressing, such as the unannounced visits, I tried to drop subtle hints that I was not interested, such as telling him that I had gone on a few dates with someone. Or also, I made it clear that I was not ready for another relationship, hoping that he would take the clear hint that while I wasn't ready to date, if I was dating, it wouldn't be him. None of this deterred him, and he didn't seem upset or hurt, which reinforced my self-doubt about his intention. Maybe I was just being crazy. It wasn't until everything came to a head that I realized how much this man had invented a relationship in his head. Therefore, allow me to repeat what I said previously. I hope our paths don't cross again.